what you see on your screen, and that's where the 40 OneWeb satellites are safely enclosed. The fairing protects the payloads from aerodynamic heating, loads, and contamination during ascent. And once we reach the vacuum of space, we will jettison the fairing halves while second stage continues to orbit. Now for today's launch, we will have 3 separate payload deployments from the second stage. The first will deploy 14 satellites, and then the second and third will each deploy 13 satellites after that. Now we will only have live views of the first payload deployment, as we won't have ground station coverage for the final 2 deployments. But for these, we will come back once we regain ground station coverage to confirm successful separation. Now lastly, that truss structure you see right alongside the rocket there is the transporter erector, or TE. We use it to roll the rocket out to the pad and raise it to its vertical launch position. The TE also routes the vehicle's
for strong back retract,
fluids, power, and telemetry umbilicals from the ground systems to the rocket and satellites until Falcon 9 goes on internal power and clears the pad. Now at liftoff, the TE will retract in order to clear the way for F9's ascent. So before the TE retracts, we will see the clamp arms will begin to open around the second stage, and then the TE
starting strong back retract
will pull away from the rocket slightly. You heard that call out. The strong back retraction has just begun. Finally, at T0, the ground hydraulic systems will pull the TE even further away from the Falcon 9 as it lifts off. You should be able to see right there on the bottom of the screen below the fairing, the clamp arms are beginning to open in preparation for the retraction of that strong back on the right-hand side of the rocket. Now the first stage is connected to a launch mount at the base of the TE, but the structure is hinged and it will retract away from the vehicle in preparation for launch. You may hear this transporter erector referred to as the strong back by the launch teams. You can see that slow tilt of that strong back on the right-hand side of the fairing as it begins to recline in preparation for launch. Now at this point in the countdown, both the first and second stages are nearly fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. Just had that call out that the first stage has finished up its liquid oxygen loading. The second stage should wrap up in about a minute at T-minus 2 minutes. You might be able to see those white clouds gathering around the vehicle. And that is chilled gas from just above the LOX tank liquid surface that we vent overboard to maintain the pressures that we want in the LOX tank. And when that gas comes into contact with the humid Florida air, you can see it condensing into those clouds coming from the booster. At T-minus 60 seconds, Falcon 9 will be in startup. This means that the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers will have taken over the countdown. And just inside of T-minus 2 seconds, we light the Merlin 1D engines for liftoff. Should be wrapping up second stage liquid oxygen loading here very shortly. The OneWeb 1 payload continues to be healthy, and the Falcon 9 team is tracking no issues on the rocket.
Stage 2, LOX load complete.
There's that call out for second stage LOX loading complete. Weather is still looking good, and the range is go for launch. With that, we are proceeding into the last few minutes of the terminal countdown. You can see that white cloud coming from the TE LOX line. This is normal and expected. In just about 30 seconds.
Launch gas closeouts.
In just under 30 seconds here, Falcon 9 will be in startup. This is when the first and second stages will begin pressurizing for launch. Shortly after that, we will wait for that final launch director go prior to liftoff.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Falcon 9 is in startup. The Falcon flight computers have taken over the countdown.
LD, go for launch.
The launch director has given that final go for launch. All systems are go for Falcon 9 and the OneWeb 1 payload for launch.
T-minus 30 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds and counting. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition, liftoff.
Pitching downrange.
M1D chamber pressure is nominal.
Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center, carrying our OneWeb 1 payload. Now during ascent, we will tilt the engines, technically called gimbaling, and that'll turn the rocket horizontally slightly in what we call a gravity turn.
Nominal power and telemetry.
So we're still going up, but we're also going horizontally away from the launch pad. You can see a beautiful sunset view of that ascent of Falcon 9.
Vehicle supersonic.
Now in just a couple minutes, we will be throttling the engines down in preparation for max Q, or the maximum aerodynamic pressure.
Max Q.
We just passed through that moment. Now the first stage, or any rocket, typically needs to go about 17,500 miles per hour horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth and actually make it into orbit. So you can keep an eye on that stage 1 telemetry on that bottom left-hand side of your screen. Looks like we're going about 2,500 miles per hour right now and increasing rapidly. In a little under a minute here, we will have 5 events coming up in quick succession. So it'll start with main engine cutoff of the first stage, followed by stage separation, a stage 1 flip as it prepares to do the boost back burn, second engine startup 1, where the second stage MVAC engine will ignite, and then the start of that first stage boost back burn. Beautiful views from that camera tracking the Falcon 9. Now we're coming up for main engine cutoff in just a few seconds. And watch out for those 5 events.
Eco.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition. Boost back startup.
Wow, what an incredible view. There you heard and you see in these incredible views from Falcon 9 first and second stages, that main engine cutoff, stage separation, the first stage flip, second engine startup, and that boost back burn where the plumes from that first and second stage were creating that beautiful light show in the sky. Now that first stage boost back burn is in progress, but it'll end here in just under 10 seconds.
Stage 1 boost back shutdown.
That was the end of the stage 1 boost back burn. And here coming up shortly, we should have fairing deployment from our second stage.
Fairing separation confirmed.
There's fairing separation. You can see that attitude
Both
control
vehicles are following
system.
nominal trajectories.
The attitude control system on that first stage, creating those beautiful plumes in the sky on those views from your left. Now, we did have confirmation of a good fairing separation for both of our fairing halves, and this is the 5th and 6th flight of those fairing halves today, and we will be attempting to retrieve them once more when they fall back down to Earth using our recovery ship, Doug. Now here at T plus 4 minutes and 20 seconds into today's mission, we are in the first of 2 planned MVAC burns ahead of satellite deployment. At T plus 6 minutes and 4 seconds, you should see the first stage's entry burn. And we're currently watching some beautiful light show performances from the first stage as it is making its way back down to Earth, with those plumes coming from our attitude control system, which is nitrogen cold gas thrusters near the top of the first stage. Now, for the entry burn coming up in about a minute, we will relight 3 of our 9 M1D engines. So it'll start with the center engine, followed shortly by the E1 and E5 engines. First stage really putting on a beautiful, incredible show there. Now we do that entry burn of the first stage to slow the vehicle down and help reduce re-entry forces to help us recover and reuse that first stage. First stage and second stage continue to look healthy. We are about 30 seconds away from the start of our entry burn on the first stage, and this will be about a 20-second burn of 3 of our M1D engines to slow that.
Stage 2 following nominal trajectory.
To slow that first stage down as it re-enters the thicker parts of the Earth's atmosphere. Hopefully we'll get some really beautiful views from the first stage there on the left.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
There is the start of our first stage entry burn, as you can see. And you can see that first stage flying through that entry burn plume, which deposits that soot on the first stage.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
Did to get that call out for a good entry
Stage 1
burn.
FTS is saved.
Stage 2 continues to be on a nominal trajectory. We are getting some spotty camera connectivity, but everything is looking good from Stage 2 telemetry. You can see the first stage is coming down back towards landing zone 1, and we will start our landing burn of that first stage in just about 10 seconds here. You can see the Cape Canaveral coast on your screen
Stage
on the
2
right.
FTS is saved.
Transonic.
There is that start of our first stage landing burn.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Really incredible views from the first stage.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing approach.
As you can see from that beautiful video from
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
from the first stage, we did have a successful landing of the first stage booster back on landing zone 1, and this landing marks the 145th recovery of a Falcon 9 first stage. Now, in just a few seconds here, we will have second engine cut off 1 of the second stage. We are getting a little bit of some spotty video connections, but you did see the second stage briefly there in the midst of that first burn. We should have SECO 1 here shortly.
MVAC shutdown.
There is that second engine cutoff, or MVAC shutdown 1. And we are just waiting for confirmation of a good orbital insertion from the second stage.
Detected loss of signal, Cape.
You heard the call out. We are in a period of loss of signal from the Cape, but hopefully we will regain connectivity here shortly.
Nominal orbit insertion.
We did just get that confirmation of a nominal orbital insertion, but the mission isn't over yet. The second stage is now embarking on its first coast phase. So after the coast phase, we will relight that MVAC engine for a second time around the T plus 55 minute mark. So we'll see you back here in about 45 minutes. But in the meantime, enjoy the space tunes, and we'll see you again soon.
Acquisition of signal, South Chile. Lost the signal. Punta Arenas. Acquisition of signal. Control. Detected loss of signal. Troll.
Precisely kind of information do you want from the satellite? What do you want? What do you want?
Acquisition of signal, Maldives.
Welcome back to the webcast of the Falcon 9 mission carrying the OneWeb 1 satellites for our customer OneWeb. We've had a nominal mission so far with Falcon 9 launching on time at 5:27 p.m. Eastern Time from Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center. We successfully recovered the first stage back on landing zone 1 with a gorgeous light show from the first stage, marking the 4th landing for this booster. And the second stage completed its first burn, taking the OneWeb satellites into space. We are just about 14 seconds away from a second ignition of the MVAC engine, which will be a really short 3-second burn and will carry the second stage of the OneWeb payload to the orbital, the orbit needed to deploy the satellites.
And shut down.
You heard that call out for that very brief MVAC startup and shutdown. It was only a 3-second burn of that MVAC engine. And we will wait on a confirmation of a
nominal
good
orbit insertion.
We just got confirmation of a nominal orbital insertion. Now the OneWeb 1 payload is still attached to the Falcon 9's second stage. Coming up next, we will have 3 blocks of deployments of the 40 OneWeb satellites. Now the first will deploy 14 satellites, which should happen in just a couple minutes here. And then around 17 minutes after that, we will have a second block of 13 satellites deploying. And finally, the last block of 13 satellites will deploy at the T+1 hour and 29-minute mark. Now, as a reminder, we only expect to have live telemetry for the first payload deployment, as we won't have ground station coverage for the second and third deployments. For those last 2, we will come back once we regain ground station coverage to confirm successful deployment. As I mentioned earlier in today's broadcast, today's mission marks OneWeb's 15th overall launch and will bring their LEO constellation to 80% completion with just over 500 satellites in space. This milestone mission also marks OneWeb's first time launching from Florida, where the satellites are produced by OneWeb Satellites in a joint venture between OneWeb and Airbus. We're at T+56 minutes and 56 seconds. And the first 14 OneWeb satellites should be deploying in about a minute and a half here at T+58 minutes and 29 seconds. Unfortunately, we aren't getting live views from the second stage right now, but you can see on your screen the trajectory of the second stage as it's making its way around the Earth, waiting to deploy that first set of 14 OneWeb satellites. If you are just joining us, we are currently waiting for the first of 3 deployments of our 40 OneWeb satellites currently riding on our Falcon 9 second stage. We did have a good 2 burns of our second stage engine. We just wrapped up a very short 3-second burn of the second stage. And we are coming up shortly on the payload deployment of 14 OneWeb satellites here in just under 30 seconds.
Acquisition of signal, Bangalore.
We got a quick view from those OneWeb satellites from the second stage, really briefly there. Just waiting on confirmation of that first set of deployments.
OneWeb, Sat A1 and A5, separation confirmed.
We did get confirmation of a successful deployment of the OneWeb satellites there. Now again, we won't have any ground station coverage.
OneWeb, sat A4 and A8, separation confirmed.
There is another couple satellites deployed. Again, we will be deploying 14 satellites in this first set of deployments. Now again, we do have ground station coverage currently for this first set of deployments, but we will not have ground station coverage for the second or third set of deployments, with the second set scheduled to happen about 17 minutes from now.
OneWeb, sat B1 and B5, separation confirmed.
There is separation of 2 more satellites in this first set of deployments. Again, we are deploying 14 satellites in this first set of deployments.
OneWeb, sat C1 and C5, separation confirmed.
There are 2 more satellites, and we briefly had a cool view from the second stage of one of those satellites floating off into space.
OneWeb, sat A2 and A6, separation confirmed.
There's another 2 satellites with confirmed deployment there. Again, we will be deploying 14 satellites in this first set of deployments. Getting some flashes of views from the second stage. You can see a couple of those satellites are now missing from their previous spots on that payload adapter. Some nice intermittent views from the second stage.
OneWeb, sat B4 and B8, separation confirmed.
We just heard the call out for 2 more satellite deployments confirmed from this set of 14 satellites. We should just have 2 more that we're waiting on this first set of deployment to round out that 14. And then we will be back for the second and third deployments. Again, we have deployed 12 out of the 14 satellites in this first set of deployments for OneWeb.
Expected loss of signal, Maldives.
You have an expected loss of signal here.
OneWeb, sat A3 and A7, separation confirmed.
You just heard that confirmation for the last 2 satellites in this first set of 14 satellites being deployed. Now coming up, because we won't have any live views for the upcoming second deployment, we'll come back around the T+1 hour and 15-minute mark to confirm deployment of that second set of 13 satellites once we reconnect with a ground station. So in the meanwhile, sit back, relax, and we'll see you back here again soon.
Expected loss of signal, Bangalore.
If you're just joining us, welcome to the webcast for the OneWeb 1 mission. We had an on-time liftoff at 5:27 p.m. Eastern Time, followed by a successful ascent, stage separation, first stage landing, 2 second stage engine burns, and the successful deployment of the first set of OneWeb satellites from the second stage. We should have separated the second block of OneWeb satellites about 2 minutes ago, but since we didn't have ground station coverage, we're going to wait to confirm that we did have that deployment once we connect to our next ground station. Now, the second deployment will have sent 13 satellites into low Earth orbit. We are waiting for our ground station coverage in Svalbard coming up in a few seconds to confirm that deployment. It's possible we might not get that ground station deployment, in which case we will just wait for our next period of ground station coverage to get that confirmation. And we are waiting for ground station coverage in order to confirm the successful deployment of our second batch of satellites, a set of 13 satellites for OneWeb.
Seven OneWeb spacecraft separations confirmed.
And we just got confirmation of 7 of those 13 satellites. We are still waiting on the additional 6 satellites from that second set.
OneWeb Sat D4 and D8 separation confirmed.
There is another 2 still waiting on 4 satellite deployment confirmations of the second set. Again, we've had confirmation of 9 of 13 successful deployments of the second set of OneWeb satellites. You can see a cool video live view from the second stage briefly here, as we've managed to get some video here. You can see many of those payload adapter slots are empty.
OneWeb Sat D3 and D7 separation confirmed.
You can see one of those OneWeb satellites floating off there from the second stage. And that was confirmation of 2 additional satellites being successfully deployed here in the second set of deployments. And we are just waiting for 2 more in this set of 13 satellites. Again, this is
OneWeb Sat C2 and C6 separation confirmed.
there. You can see very cool views of that satellite popping off from the second stage. Again, that was our last 2 satellites of this set of 13 satellites in this second set of deployments. So now we've had good confirmation of those. We're going to take another short coast phase before the third and final deployment for today's mission, which is scheduled to take place in about another 15 minutes. Now, again, we won't have ground station coverage for the final deployment, but we will come back to confirm that deployment was successful around the T+1 hour and 30-minute mark. So until then, enjoy the space tunes, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes or so.
Expected loss of signal is forward. Acquisition of signal, Kodiak.
OneWeb, Sat E3 and E7, separation confirmed. OneWeb, Sat B3, separation confirmed.
Expected loss of signal, Kodiak.
OneWeb, Sat D1 and D5, separation confirmed. OneWeb, Sat E8, separation confirmed. OneWeb, Sat E4, separation confirmed.
Acquisition of signal, Vandenberg.
OneWeb, Sat D2 and D6, separation confirmed. OneWeb, Sat E2 and E6, separation confirmed. OneWeb, Sat E1 and E5, separation confirmed. 40 OneWeb spacecraft satellite separations confirmed.
Hello again. We are here nearing the end of our mission today for our customer OneWeb. As you may have been following along with the live views from the second stage, we have deployed all 40 of the satellites from the second stage today. And you may have been following along with those views, but those bright spots that you may have seen in the background were the other OneWeb satellites that have just been deployed. So with the successful deployment of those 40 OneWeb satellites, that brings today's mission to a close. All of us here at SpaceX want to give a big thank you to our customer OneWeb for entrusting us with today's mission. We also want to give a shout out to the Range and Federal Aviation Administration for supporting today's mission. Tonight's launch concludes our 193rd overall SpaceX mission to date and 55th launch this year. Thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in and your continued support. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll